What if everything you trusted about military might could vanish in just 48 hours? Picture a city like Iskra, a fortress city, its defenses painstakingly built over years, celebrated as the ultimate stronghold. Its thick concrete layers, deep underground bunkers, and sprawling minefields were designed to repel any force. On paper, Iskra should have been unbreakable, a monument to the very best in defensive engineering, a city that inspired confidence not only in its defenders, but also in its allies and the world watching from afar. But in the cold reality of war, appearances can be deceiving. In only 2 days, just 48 hours, the city fell. Its defenses crumbled, its defenders surrendered, and its reputation as an indomitable bastion evaporated almost instantly. The world watched in disbelief as Iskra, once thought untouchable, was wiped from the map of strongholds. The shock was not merely that Iskra changed hands, but the speed and completeness of its collapse. There was no drawn-out siege or desperate last stand. Instead, the city capitulated with stunning swiftness. Analysts across the West and Ukraine were left stunned, forced to question everything they believed about modern warfare. Iskra's sudden fall shattered illusions and exposed a chilling lesson. Even the most fortified positions can dissolve in a moment. Underestimating how rapidly the tide can turn risks disaster, misjudging threats, squandering resources, and clinging to outdated doctrines. Let us wind the clock back and trace, step by step, how Iskra's defenses unraveled in what felt like a single, unstoppable exhale. To truly appreciate the gravity of what happened, consider not just the physical destruction, but the psychological and strategic devastation that followed. To understand the scale of this implosion, we must begin at the very heart of Iskra's defenses. Only then can we grasp how its fate became a warning for every military planner. The fall of Iskra is not just a tale of breached walls, but of shattered certainties and a world forced to reckon with uncomfortable truths. How does a city earn a reputation for invincibility? And what happens when that myth is obliterated? For months, Iskra was more than a mere dot on a map. It pulsed as the vitally important heart of supply and command, sustaining dozens of defensive positions stretched across more than 100 kilometers of front. Every major route, whether by road or rail, converged on Iskra, keeping entire sectors alive and connected. To appreciate the logistical importance of Iskra, imagine the city as the heart in a biological body. When the heart stops, the body's extremities, its arms and legs, quickly lose function. In war, when a logistical hub is lost, the outlying positions starve, wither, and collapse. History is replete with such moments. In the Second World War, the fall of Bastogne threatened to unravel the entire Allied position in the Ardennes, and in the ancient world, the loss of supply hubs like Carthage turned the tide of entire empires. The defenses were the stuff of legend. Layers of reinforced concrete, labyrinths of deep underground bunkers, and rings of minefields made Iskra the gold standard for modern fortification. Western experts praised it as the pinnacle of defensive doctrine, a shining example of how to render a position unbreakable. To the Ukrainian High Command, Iskra was not just a city. It was the cornerstone, the linchpin holding together a vast segment of the front. Its sudden loss did not simply mean a city had fallen. It was as if the entire backbone of the defense snapped, severing supply lines and creating a gaping void that stretched for over 100 kilometers. Dozens of outposts were left stranded, starved of ammunition, reinforcements, and hope. This was not a localized setback. The shock reverberated through military and political leadership, shattering the confidence of those who believed technology and engineering alone could guarantee safety. To see Iskra as merely a strongpoint would be to overlook the true scale of the catastrophe unleashed by its fall. Yet Iskra was not crushed by steel, firepower, or concrete alone. The decisive blows came in the shadows: intelligence operations, relentless psychological pressure, and a ruthless contest of adaptation. In this hidden arena, the very rules of war were about to be rewritten. To understand how Iskra fell, we must look beyond the front lines and into the battle for minds and information. The unraveling began long before the first defenses were breached. This was not merely a contest of firepower, but a chess match played in shadow, with moves and counter-moves that went unseen by the public eye. What happens when your enemy can anticipate your every move, sometimes before you have even made it? The fall of Iskra was not a story of brute force, but of a mind quietly outpacing its opponent. For months, Russian planners orchestrated a campaign unlike any seen in recent memory. Their intelligence machine was relentless. Agents slipped through shadows, charting every evolving guard routine, tracing each supply chain, marking every overlooked weakness in the city's labyrinth of defenses. Inside Iskra, Ukrainian forces believed their barriers were unbreakable. Thick concrete walls, tangled minefields, and a sense of security dulled their awareness. They did not realize the enemy was not just observing. They were absorbing patterns, learning habits, and waiting for a single slip. That slip came with a fatal misjudgment. In their effort to protect supplies, the defenders stashed ammunition and fuel dangerously close to barracks and civilian apartments. Concealment was the goal, disaster was the result. When precision strikes came, they triggered firestorms of secondary explosions, shredding the defenders' lines from within and plunging the city into chaos. This echoes mistakes made throughout military history. During the Second World War, the infamous Port Chicago disaster resulted from storing munitions too close to critical infrastructure. In Vietnam, poorly sited ammunition dumps became catastrophic targets for well-placed enemy fire. Iskra's planners, perhaps seeking to avoid detection by drones or satellites, inadvertently created a situation where a single strike could ignite a chain reaction of devastation. Yet, it was not concrete and steel that truly failed. The decisive blow was psychological. Many Ukrainian soldiers had not rotated out for months, 3, 4, even 5 cycles without rest. Fatigue seeped into the trenches. Morale cracked, responses slowed, vigilance faded. They were present, but hollowed by exhaustion, dulled to danger and defeat alike. This is a pattern seen in many conflicts. During the siege of Leningrad, defenders grew numb to bombardment. In more recent wars, such as in Afghanistan, units left too long at the front became shadows of themselves. Psychological resilience is as vital as any physical barrier, and in Iskra, that resilience was eroded long before the final assault. Russian command sensed exactly when to act. They struck as the defenders' spirits hit their lowest ebb, exploiting every bit of intelligence and every fracture fatigue had wrought. The assault was surgical, merciless, and timed to perfection. Rather than a massed frontal attack, they used feints, psychological operations, and pinpoint strikes to sow confusion and panic. In the end, Iskra's fall was not just the collapse of a city. It was a silent chess match. One side thinking a dozen moves ahead, the other playing blind. The lesson is stark. Ignore intelligence, overlook morale, and cling to static defenses, and you risk losing not just battles, but the future itself. The shockwaves from Iskra's sudden collapse rippled far beyond its ruined walls. Commanders, analysts, and entire nations scrambled to grasp what had truly happened, and what might come next. NATO advisors, watching from afar, began to question long-held beliefs about the invulnerability of fortified positions. The phone lines between capitals lit up with urgent consultations and crisis meetings. What if a fortress everyone trusted could collapse in a single night, setting off disaster far beyond its walls? That is exactly what happened with Iskra. Its sudden fall did not just surprise the enemy. It set off a chain reaction that no experienced strategist could have truly foreseen. Iskra's defenses disintegrated in less than 2 days. The city was not just a bulwark. It was the vital heart of a web of supply lines and communications, feeding dozens of outposts stretched across more than 100 kilometers. When Iskra broke, these outposts were left stranded, cut off from ammunition, food, and hope of reinforcement. Their positions became indefensible almost instantly. Panic erupted among Ukrainian troops. Whole platoons defied orders, deserted, or pleaded for rescue. Fear did not wait for orders. It spread on its own, corroding discipline and resolve. Within hours, brigades that had once stood firm became haunted by the sense that they were next. But this was not only a Ukrainian catastrophe. Every trench and bunker overrun made Western military doctrine look suddenly fragile. For years, billions of dollars in equipment and months of training had been poured into making positions like Iskra unbreakable. Now, that illusion vanished in less than 48 hours, and the world was watching. Nato and Western backers felt the blow. The rapid collapse of Iskra revealed vulnerabilities no one wanted to see. Assumptions about 21st century warfare, about technology, engineering, and the certainty of defense, shattered. If Iskra could fall so swiftly, what hope did any other stronghold have? The psychological fallout was devastating. Panic is contagious, and doubt spreads faster than artillery. Not only soldiers on the front, but also commanders, strategists, and even distant policymakers found themselves infected with uncertainty. What began as a tactical debacle now threatened to unravel alliances and undermine the very will to resist. The collapse of Iskra was not just about losing ground. It was about the instant evaporation of confidence, the breakdown of trust, and the terrifying speed at which entire defense structures can unravel. In war, the mind is as important as the map. When faith evaporates, the consequences ripple far beyond the battlefield, rewriting futures in ways no one can fully predict. But the shockwaves from Iskra's fall had only begun to spread. In the days that followed, commanders on both sides scrambled to adjust, desperate to seize, or salvage, the new reality. Could the next Iskra be prevented? Or is every fortress just one overlooked weakness away from ruin? The fall of Iskra reveals more than a single slip-up. It uncovers a dangerous pattern infecting even the most fortified positions. The first lesson is stark. Never place blind faith in static walls or rigid routines. Against an agile, information-driven enemy, yesterday's blueprints can turn into today's liabilities. Iskra's defenders trusted their engineering, their firepower, and their past successes. But that confidence became a trap. As threats evolved and reality shifted, their mindset stayed stubbornly fixed. True resilience is forged in people's minds and morale, not in steel and concrete alone. Psychological exhaustion, endless tension, and months without relief did as much damage as any enemy shell. Rotation and mental stamina matter as much as weaponry. Exhausted, isolated troops become easy prey, even if they are sheltered behind the thickest walls. Iskra's garrison was pushed far beyond its limits, and when the assault finally came, the collapse began from within. By the time the enemy breached the gates, the defenders' will had already been broken. Adaptability beats brute force. The attackers did not hurl endless numbers against the city's defenses. Instead, they relied on deception, exploited hidden vulnerabilities, and struck where complacency had taken root. By masking their preparations and shattering predictable routines, they rendered Iskra's mighty fortifications useless. Innovation and surprise transformed a bastion into a trap. Strategists must never forget, war is restless. The enemy will not obey your rules. Defenses must adapt constantly, questioning comfortable assumptions, confronting flaws head-on, and discarding wishful thinking. Reality punishes those who cling to tradition while the world changes around them. Iskra's fate is a warning. Any system, no matter how expertly designed, can be undone by complacency. Defeat begins not with the enemy, but with lapses in vigilance and imagination. If these lessons go unheeded, future strongholds, be they military fortresses or national strategies, will repeat the same fatal errors. History is littered with citadels brought down not by overwhelming force, but by a single failure of thought. Consider the fall of the Maginot Line in the Second World War. France invested enormous sums and years of effort building a line of fortifications thought to be impenetrable. Yet, in just weeks, German forces bypassed and rendered it obsolete, not by brute force, but by adapting their tactics and exploiting static thinking. Similarly, in the ancient world, the city of Troy fell not to siege, but to deception, a wooden horse, and an act of cunning. The lesson echoes through time. The enemy who adapts faster, who thinks creatively, will find a way through any wall. So, what practical steps can be taken to avoid the fate of Iskra? First, prioritize flexible defense. Rotate troops regularly to prevent exhaustion and loss of morale. Establish robust intelligence and counterintelligence networks to detect enemy infiltration and information gathering. Review and update defensive plans constantly, seeking out vulnerabilities rather than hiding from them. Second, never concentrate critical supplies in easily targeted locations. Disperse ammunition and fuel, and safeguard them with deception and camouflage. Conduct regular drills simulating surprise attacks and breaches, so defenders respond to chaos with discipline, not panic. Third, foster a culture of questioning and learning. Encourage junior officers and soldiers to report weaknesses and suggest improvements. Reward adaptability and innovation, even if it means abandoning cherished routines or traditions. War is not won by those who stand still, but by those who learn and evolve every day. Iskra's collapse is more than a military loss. It is a signal to every commander and policymaker. The shock waves will shape every decision that follows. History rarely waits for those who cling to comforting illusions. Nowhere was this more vivid than in Iskra, a fortress city that fell not to overwhelming might, but to its defenders' unwillingness to adapt. As the world watched, Iskra's walls crumbled, undone by failure to question, failure to recognize that the very rules of survival had changed overnight. This is not only a lesson in military strategy. It is a warning about the cost of ignoring shifting realities, on the battlefield, in business, or within government. When we refuse to face uncomfortable truths or adapt to new threats, we do not just endanger ourselves, we imperil everyone who relies on our decisions. Iskra's defenders trusted in old tactics and the false security of concrete and routine. But the ground beneath them had already shifted. Intelligence operations, psychological warfare, and relentless deception unraveled their defenses in less than 48 hours, toppling not only a garrison, but shattering the sense of safety for hundreds of kilometers along the front. These consequences ripple far beyond one city's fall. In a world where the pace of change accelerates, those who cling to outdated models, out of pride, habit, or fear, risk losing everything. Defeat may mean lost territory and broken alliances, but it also means eroded confidence and diminished credibility that can haunt nations and leaders for years. This lesson is not abstract. Ask yourself, where are you relying on yesterday's assumptions? Where are we, as societies, refusing to see new dangers or opportunities, simply because the old ways feel safer? Iskra's collapse is more than a military tragedy. It is a blueprint for disaster when vigilance gives way to comfort. So, what can we learn beyond the battlefield? Consider how the same patterns play out in business or governance. Companies that failed to adapt to the digital revolution, like Blockbuster or Kodak, fell not because their products were bad, but because they clung to old models while the world moved on. Governments that ignore emerging threats, be they cyber attacks, pandemics, or financial crises, risk catastrophe by failing to adapt. Stay curious. Challenge every assumption. Seek uncomfortable truths. In this era of rapid change, survival belongs to those who adapt first, see clearly, and never underestimate the cunning of their rivals. In the end, the fall of Iskra is not just a story of war. It is a reminder that every fortress, every institution, every certainty can be swept away in the blink of an eye. The only true defense is adaptability, vigilance, and the courage to face the future with open eyes.